Have you ever stood inside a house you bought with every penny you had, only to be told you don't belong there? That was me, Howard Ellison, 75 years old, on what should have been the happiest evening of my late life. Instead, it was the night my own daughter and her husband told me to pack my things and get out. During the housewarming party of the home I paid for in full, I still remember how the laughter from the living room bled through the door as Derek crossed his arms, standing like a bouncer at the threshold of my bedroom. My daughter Laura stood behind him, eyes lowered, unable or unwilling to look at me. "Dad," she said softly, "we've decided it's best you live somewhere else. This is our home now." Their words stung worse than any injury my body ever took in a lifetime of construction work. And yet, if I'm honest, maybe the seeds had been planted long before that night. Let me take you back. I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. My life wasn't glamorous. I spent 5 decades on job sites laying foundations, pouring concrete, supervising crews on bridges and highways. My late wife, Margaret, used to say I had the patience of stone and the backbone of steel. She was my soft place to land, the reason I saved instead of spent. While other foremen blew their wages on fishing boats or weekends in Biloxi, I tucked mine away. By 50, I had bought 2 rental properties, nothing fancy but steady income. By retirement, I had a tidy nest egg and a modest home in the East End of Savannah. It wasn't much to brag about, but it was honest and it was mine. Then 6 years ago, cancer took Margaret from me. Since then, I've lived with a silence that rattled louder than any jackhammer. My daughter Laura, our only child, was my anchor. Or so I thought. She had her own family by then, her husband Derek, who ran a small freight business with a couple of trucks, and their 2 children, Mason and Chloe. I reached out, often called, invited them to dinner, tried to stay connected. They came by sometimes, but always rushed. The grandkids barely looked up from their phones. Laura was polite but distant. Derek cold as granite. I figured maybe I reminded Laura too much of her mother. Maybe Derek just never cared for me. I didn't push it, but as the years rolled on, the loneliness grew heavier. I found myself talking back to the TV, cooking for one, staring out the window, just to see a neighbor's dog trot by. One evening it hit me like a hammer drop. I had the means to change things. What if I bought a place big enough for all of us? They could save on rent, the grandkids would have space, and I wouldn't die alone in a silent house. The very next morning, I called Laura and asked to meet. We sat in a small cafe near her clinic. I laid out my plan. I'd sell my home cash and some savings and put it all toward a property that could be our family estate. "Dad, are you serious?" she asked, eyes wide. And then I swear I saw it, a flicker of interest, a calculation. "There's a place near the river," I told her. 4 bedrooms, wide porch, high ceilings. Pricey, about 1.8 million, but I can manage. "You always dreamed of a garden, didn't you?" Laura twisted her napkin. "That's very generous. But have you talked to Derek?" "Not yet. I wanted your thoughts first." She hesitated, chewing her lip. "Well, let me talk to him. We'll figure it out." 2 days later, they came to my house. Derek, normally stiff and sour, was suddenly all smiles. He clapped my shoulder, called me Dad for the first time in 20 years. "This is a brilliant idea, Howard. Truly. We'll all be one happy family." Something in his tone felt rehearsed, but my heart was too full of hope to notice. We discussed details. I suggested all our names go on the deed, but Derek waved it off. Too complicated. Easier if it's just me and Laura. Taxes, paperwork, you know how it is. Laura chimed in. Dad, if something happened to you at your age, it'd be tied up in court. This way it's simpler. I paused. Their insistence pinched something in my gut, but I told myself they were right. At 75, maybe it was wise to put things in order. So I signed. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment I gave away more than just property. I handed them the keys not only to the house, but to my dignity. And within weeks, I'd find myself exiled from the very dream I thought would bring us together. By the way, I'd love to know, where are you watching this story from? Drop your state, your city, maybe even your country down in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this one, make sure to hit subscribe to Brian's Story so you'll never miss the next chapter. The papers were signed, the money transferred. And just like that, the Victorian home on the banks of the Savannah River belonged to Laura and Derek, at least on paper. I told myself it didn't matter whose name was on the deed. What mattered was that I'd be under the same roof as my daughter, my grandchildren, and maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't feel so alone anymore. The day we moved in, the house smelled of fresh paint and polished wood. Movers carried in box after box, while Laura directed traffic, her voice bright and commanding. Derek strutted around like a man who had just closed the deal of the century. Mason disappeared upstairs with his headphones on, and Chloe filmed a video on her phone capturing the spiral staircase and the view of the river. Dad, your room's all set, Laura said, leading me to the ground floor. This way you won't have to climb stairs. Derek chimed in, clapping his hands. We'll call it Grandpa's wing. Nice and private. At first I thought they were being considerate. A spacious room, a private bathroom, even French doors opening to the back garden. But something about Derek's smirk told me it was less a gesture of kindness and more a way to keep me out of sight. Still, the first week felt almost like a dream. We ate dinners together in the big dining room. Laura made chicken and rice the way Margaret used to, and I felt a pang of warmth I hadn't felt in years. Derek even asked me about landscaping ideas for the backyard. For a brief moment, I believed I had given my family not just a house, but a home. But slowly, the cracks showed. One evening, I came out to the garden while Mason was tossing a football with his friends. Derek pulled me aside and whispered through clenched teeth, "You're making the kids uncomfortable. Let them have their space." Another time, I offered to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Derek waved me off. "I've got it. You just relax in your room." Even meals changed. Instead of gathering at the long dining table, Laura began bringing food to my room, saying the kids need the table for homework. Homework, I knew better. It was a slow, deliberate push to the sidelines. Then came the housewarming party. Laura announced it one morning over coffee. "We're going to invite friends, neighbors, people from the clinic. Saturday evening. You'll love it, Dad." Derek added quickly, "All you need to do is look sharp and smile. Leave the rest to us." His tone carried the same false cheer I'd grown used to. I put on my best navy suit, the one Margaret bought me for my 70th birthday. I even dabbed on French cologne, the kind I only used for special occasions. When I stepped into the living room, the place sparkled candles, catered food, glasses of champagne clinking. Music played low and the chatter filled every corner. But as I greeted guest after guest, I realized something I didn't know a soul. Not one neighbor from my old street. Not a single friend of mine. It was Laura and Derek's party, not ours. At one point, a man about my age leaned in and asked, "So how long has this house been in your family?" Pride swelled in me, and I smiled. I just bought it last month so my daughter and I could... I didn't get to finish. Derek slipped his arm around me, his grip firm on my shoulder. Well, technically, it's Laura's and mine. Howard just helped with the down payment. The man raised his brows. Oh, I see. My cheeks burned. A lie plain and public. After the man walked away, Derek hissed into my ear. Don't you ever tell anyone you bought this house. You're embarrassing me, making me look weak. I blinked at him. Embarrassing you, Derek? I paid every cent. Then keep that to yourself, he snapped. This is our home and you're just a guest. A guest. In the house my entire life savings had paid for. I stood there listening to the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in the middle of my own family. What I didn't know then was that the party wasn't just a celebration. It was the stage for my exile. I slipped away from the party around 9 o'clock. The music was too loud, the laughter too sharp, and Derek's words still echoed in my head. You're just a guest. I sat on the edge of my bed in the so-called grandpa's wing, staring at the half-packed boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack. Something inside me whispered that I wasn't welcome here, not really. That whisper turned into a shout an hour later. The door opened without a knock. Laura and Derek walked in together, their faces stiff, rehearsed. Laura sat at the edge of my bed, twisting her bracelet. Derek leaned against the dresser, arms crossed. Dad, Laura began, her voice flat. We've been thinking. It's best if you live somewhere else. Tonight. I blinked. Tonight? What are you talking about? I bought this house so we could... No, Derek cut me off, his tone sharp. Technically, we own this house. That's what the deed says. And honestly, your presence is disruptive. The kids feel uncomfortable, Laura and I feel on edge. It's not working. I turned to Laura, desperate. Laura, say something. This is madness. She lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. We just think a retirement community or a nursing home could take better care of you. My throat tightened. A nursing home. You're throwing me into a home from the house I paid for. Don't be dramatic. Derek sneered. It's not forever. Just pack your things and let's avoid a scene. We have guests out there. The room spun. I'd spent 75 years building a life-saving penny by penny, and in one evening I was reduced to a problem to be removed. I packed mechanically, shirts, pants, my shaving kit, Margaret's photo album. I tried to make it all fit into one suitcase as if my entire existence could be zipped shut. Then came the knock on the doorframe. Mason and Chloe stood there smirking. Grandpa's moving out. Chloe giggled, snapping her gum. Don't forget your pills and diapers. Mason crossed his arms, puffed his chest, just like his father. Mom says you can only take your personal stuff. Don't try to sneak anything else. Their cruelty cut deeper than Derek's arrogance or Laura's silence. These were the kids I once pushed on swings, bought Christmas presents for read bedtime stories to. Now they mocked me like a burden to be tossed out. Get out! I told them, my voice shaking with rage. Now! They laughed as they left, leaving the door wide open. Their laughter trailed down the hall, blending with the music from the party. Exactly. An hour later, Derek returned. He glanced at his watch. Cab's here. Ready? I zipped the suitcase, jaw clenched. It was better to leave quietly than be dragged out in front of strangers. As we walked down the hall, I caught a glimpse of the party. guests sipping champagne, dancing oblivious. Laura stood in the corner laughing at a joke. Our eyes met. For a split second, her smile faltered, but then she turned away. That was the moment something inside me broke for good. Derek held the door open. The cool night air slapped my face. The taxi idled at the curb. The driver asked, "Where to?" I swallowed hard. My whole life I'd had an address. Now, nothing. "Any hotel nearby," I muttered. The car pulled away, headlights carving through the dark streets of Savannah. I looked back one last time. Through the wide windows of the mansion, I saw silhouettes of people dancing, raising glasses, celebrating. None of them noticed the man who had paid for it. All was being banished like unwanted baggage. That night, in a cramped motel room, with a buzzing neon light outside the window, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled of bleach, the air conditioner rattled like loose gravel. I thought about Margaret, about the promises we'd made to each other, about the dream of family I had tried to hold on to. And I swore to myself, never again would I let them use me. The Harbor Lights Motel was supposed to be budget-friendly. What it really meant was paper-thin walls, a vending machine in the hallway, and a mattress that swallowed me whole. For 3 nights, I survived on potato chips, candy bars, and coffee brewed so weak it looked like rusted water. On the 4th morning, I stared at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. 75 years old, a lifetime of work etched into the lines on my face, and here I was, homeless, betrayed, and alone. I told myself I couldn't live like this. So I took the bus downtown and started looking for a permanent place. Savannah, the city I'd known my whole life, suddenly felt foreign. Every street corner reminded me of a life I no longer had. By evening, I found a one-room apartment above a shuttered dry cleaner. The landlord looked me up and down, saw the gray hair, and immediately demanded 3 months' rent up front. I didn't argue. I handed over the cash from my savings and walked into what would now be called home. Home, if you could call it that. The kitchen sink dripped constantly, the carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the window overlooked an alley littered with beer bottles. I placed Margaret's photo on the nightstand. It was the only thing that made the place feel less like exile and more like survival. Nights were the hardest. The silence pressed on me until I thought I'd suffocate. I replayed Laura's words again and again. "This is our home now. You'd be better off somewhere else." I asked myself what Margaret would think if she'd been alive to see it. Would she have believed our daughter could turn so cold? I tried to create routine. Bought a few dishes, some second-hand books, stocked the pantry with canned soup and cereal. I told myself if I just kept moving, kept breathing, I'd eventually feel normal. But the truth was, every morning I woke up with the same hollow ache. One Saturday, desperate for air, I wandered to Forsyth Park. The oak trees spread wide, draped in Spanish moss, their shade heavy with memories. Families picnicked, kids chased soccer balls, couples strolled hand in hand. I sat on a bench and wondered if I was destined to spend the rest of my life invisible. Howard Ellison, the voice startled me. I turned and saw a stocky man with a cane grinning under a bristle of gray stubble. It took me a second, but then I recognized him. Gerald Patterson, my old colleague from the bridge projects decades ago. Gerald. My throat tightened. I'll be damned. He chuckled, easing himself onto the bench beside me. "Haven't seen you since Margaret's funeral. Thought you disappeared." I tried to answer with something light. but the weight in my chest gave way. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything about the house, the party, the eviction, the motel, the shoebox apartment. My words cracked, and to my own shame, tears slipped down my face. Gerald didn't interrupt. He just put a hand on my shoulder and let me unravel. When I finished, he muttered only 2 words. "Damn bastards." I shook my head. It's my fault. I thought they wanted me. Turns out they just wanted what I had. "No, Howard," Gerald said firmly. "You loved your family. They betrayed you. There's a difference." We sat in silence, watching the kids run across the field. Then Gerald nudged me with his cane. "Listen, I play cards with some old-timers at the community center. Why don't you come?" Beats, staring at 4 walls. I wanted to decline. I didn't feel like company. But something in his voice reminded me of the men we used to be, working side by side, laughing through long shifts. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That decision would change everything. Because through Gerald, I would soon discover not only companionship, but the truth about the house that had been the center of my downfall. The community center smelled of brewed coffee and old wood polish. Gerald pushed open the glass doors with his cane and waved me in. Inside, a few men huddled around card tables, stacks of worn playing cards in their hands. The hum of laughter and the clink of coffee mugs filled the room. "This here's Howard," Gerald announced. "He built half the bridges in this county, whether he admits it or not." The men looked up, nodded, and welcomed me without question. One offered me a seat, another poured me coffee. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt seen. We played bridge that afternoon. My hands were stiff, my mind rusty, but the rhythm of the game loosened something inside me. I found myself chuckling at old stories, swapping worksite jokes, almost forgetting the emptiness waiting back in my apartment. When the game ended, Gerald clapped me on the back. "See better than rotting away alone." I couldn't argue. Over the next week, I came back. Little by little, I thawed. And one evening, as I recounted my story, how I'd bought the Riverside mansion only to be thrown out during the housewarming party, Gerald's brow furrowed. "What company handled the sale?" he asked. "Southern Heritage Realty," I answered. "Why?" Gerald tapped his cane against the floor. "Heard that name in the papers. Something ugly. Let me make a call." The next afternoon, he returned with a newspaper folded under his arm. He jabbed at a headline, "Southern Heritage Realty under investigation for fraudulent property sales." The article detailed schemes selling houses with hidden liens, forging documents, hiding the fact that properties were already tied up with banks. A chill crawled up my spine. "Gerald, are you saying my house?" "I'm saying you might have been scammed, old friend." He leaned closer. "Good thing I've got a nephew-in-law. Bright kid. He'll know what to do." That weekend, Gerald introduced me to Ethan Cole, his 30-something nephew with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. We met in a quiet corner of the community center, papers spread out on the table between us. "Mr. Ellison," Ethan said, "scanning my deed and receipts, from what I'm seeing, this sale stinks. Southern Heritage Realty has a record of moving properties still tied to unpaid mortgages. The bank may already be preparing foreclosure." My chest tightened. Foreclosure. "You mean Laura and Derek could be evicted?" Ethan finished. "Because technically they're the listed owners, but you're the buyer of record. That means you're the one defrauded." I gripped the edge of the table. "So what happens to me?" Ethan leaned back, fingers steepled. If we prove the transaction was fraudulent, you can file a claim to recover your money. Now it may not be the full amount, but you could get a significant portion back. The catch is Southern Heritage just filed bankruptcy. We'd have to chase assets the directors siphoned off. And the house. If the bank's lien is valid, the house will be seized. Your daughter and her husband will be forced out. I sat stunned. Not only had my family betrayed me, but the house itself might never have been truly ours to begin with. It was as if every brick of that mansion was laid with deceit. "Do you want me to take the case?" Ethan asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away from the whole nightmare. But then I thought of the nights in that motel, of Laura's eyes turning cold, of Derek sneering. "You're just a guest." "Yes," I said finally. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Let's go after them. I want the truth." Ethan nodded, gathering the papers. "Then buckle up, Mr. Ellison. This won't be quick, but it may be the first step in getting your dignity back." I walked home that evening with Gerald beside me. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt a flicker of something I thought was gone: hope. Ethan's words haunted me all week. The bank may already be preparing foreclosure. I tried to distract myself. I went back to the card tables, listened to Gerald's war stories, even walked the riverfront where Spanish moss dipped low over the water. But every time the wind rattled the branches, I heard Derek's voice again. "This is our house now." A week later, the phone rang. Laura's name flashed on the screen. For a long moment, I just stared, my thumb hovering. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but another part, the foolish part that still remembered braiding her pigtails when she was 7, made me press accept. "Dad." Her voice cracked, frantic. "Oh, thank God." "We're in trouble." I said nothing, waiting. "They came this morning, 2 men from the bank. They handed us papers, said the property was never clear, that the previous owner's mortgage wasn't paid. They're giving us 3 days to vacate." 3 days, what do we do? I closed my eyes. Ethan had been right. Laura's words tumbled out fast and panicked. "Derek's calling it a mistake, but we don't have money for a lawyer. The kids are scared." "Dad, you have to help us, please." That word have to hit me like a slap. Not "please, will you?" Not "we're sorry for what we did." Just expectation, obligation. "What exactly do you want me to do, Laura?" My voice sounded like someone else's, low and cold. "Money. We need money to fight this, to rent somewhere until it's settled. And maybe you could talk to the bank. You know people. You know real estate." I almost laughed. After everything they had done, after shoving me into a cab on housewarming night, she still saw me only as a wallet with legs. "Do you remember," I asked slowly, "what you said to me that night?" What she sounded confused. "You looked me in the eye and said, 'We don't need you anymore. Thank you for the house, but you don't belong here.'" "Dad, this isn't the time for old grudges." Her voice sharpened. "We're facing disaster. You think I wasn't facing disaster when you threw me out? When I slept in a motel with nothing but chips for dinner? Did you call then? Did you care then?" Silence stretched on the line. Then a muffled sound, Derek's voice in the background. "Give me the phone." "Howard," he barked. "Look, we know mistakes were made. But this isn't about feelings. We need help. You've got savings connections. Step up." I almost marveled at his audacity. "Step up," I repeated. "I already stepped up. I bought you a house with every cent I had. and you repaid me by kicking me out. Now you want me to fix your mess. Think of the kids Derek pressed. They're your grandchildren. My mind flashed to Mason grinning at me as he mocked my pills, to Chloe snapping her gum and calling me useless. My chest tightened, not with love, but with clarity. No, I said, my voice flat. They're your kids. You raised them. You taught them how to treat me. Now live with it. You'll regret this, Derek snapped. When you're old and alone, I'm already old and alone, I interrupted. And you know what? It's better than being surrounded by traitors. I pressed end call before he could answer. The phone buzzed again within seconds. I let it. Then again and again. Finally, I muted the ringer and set it face down. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt a strange calm. Not happiness, not gloating, just a release. They no longer had power over me. That night, I brewed tea in my little kitchen, turned on the radio to an old jazz station, and sat in my threadbare armchair. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, I sat with the knowledge that my daughter had finally learned what I had learned the hard way: you can't build a home on lies. Ethan spread the papers across the cafe table, his pen tapping on the signature line. Mr. Ellison, this statement of claim is your ticket. It puts you in line with the other victims of Southern heritage. If the court sees their assets, and I believe they will, you stand to recover a good portion of what you lost. I stared at the pages. The words blurred together, legal phrases, clauses, subsections, but I understood the gist. This was my chance to claw back dignity, not just money. I signed. My hand trembled, but not from doubt. From relief. Ethan gathered the forms into a neat stack. I'll file these today. Once the judge sees how many seniors were defrauded, this will move quickly. Meanwhile, the bank is already foreclosing on the properties. That last part lodged in my chest. So my daughter, she and her husband will be evicted. Legally, the house was never theirs to begin with. I left the cafe with Gerald by my side. He clapped my shoulder. It's justice, Howard. They made their bed. Justice, yes. But it still tasted bitter. 2 days later, curiosity got the better of me. I walked down to the Riverside Boulevard where the mansion stood. The house gleamed in the late afternoon sun shutters, bright white against the brick. For a second, I saw it the way I once did, a dream, a family united, Margaret's roses climbing the porch rails. Then the illusion cracked. A moving truck idled at the curb. 2 men in bank logo jackets stood at the gate, clipboards in hand. Derek was pacing the driveway, face red, arms flailing as he argued. Laura was on the porch steps, head in her hands. I stopped across the street, half hidden by a tree. I couldn't hear every word, but the scene spoke for itself. Boxes stacked haphazardly, furniture dragged onto the lawn, neighbors slowing their cars to gawk. 3 days means 3 days, one of the bank reps said firmly. You've had your notice. This house is under foreclosure. You need to vacate today. Derek cursed, waving his arms. This is our home, you can't just throw us out. The man's reply was steady. Then call your attorney. But unless he brings a court order by sunset, you're out. Laura lifted her face streaked with tears. For a split second, her eyes swept the street. Our gazes met. She froze. I expected her to run over, to plead, to call my name. Instead, she dropped her eyes as if ashamed or maybe too proud to acknowledge me. I stood rooted to the spot, watching strangers carry out the dining table I'd once sat at with them, the sofa, where Chloe sprawled with her phone, the rug Margaret would have loved. Piece by piece, the dream dissolved onto the pavement. I thought I'd feel triumph, vindication. But all I felt was tired. Tired of betrayal, tired of pretense, tired of watching the wreckage of something that was never real to begin with. Gerald's words from the night before echoed in my head. It's justice. Yes. But justice doesn't always bring joy. Sometimes it just closes a chapter. When the last box was loaded onto the truck, Derek slumped against the fence, sweat darkening his shirt. Laura clutched a small duffel bag, her shoulders bowed. The kids weren't in sight, maybe hiding inside, maybe pretending none of this was happening. I turned away before they could see me again. The sun dipped low over the river as I walked back toward the bus stop. Behind me, the house stood tall and beautiful, but hollow like a monument to every mistake I'd made in the name of family. And as I walked, a strange peace settled over me. For the first time since Margaret's death, I wasn't chasing after what I'd lost. I was ready to fight for what I still had left, my own life, my own dignity. The courthouse in Savannah rose tall with its marble columns and echoing halls. I'd walked past it 100 times in my life, never thinking I'd one day sit inside as a plaintiff. But there I was, one of dozens of gray-haired men and women lined up against a company that had preyed on our trust. Ethan stood beside me, calm and confident. Remember, Mr. Ellison, just answer plainly. Tell the truth. That's all we need. When the judge called my name, I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice didn't waver. I told the story how I sold my home, how I cashed my savings, how I trusted Southern Heritage to secure a property for my family. How I was promised clear title only to be thrown out weeks later. The defense tried to argue we should have known better. But when the prosecutor held up forged documents and bank statements showing millions siphoned into offshore accounts, the truth became undeniable. For a week, the trial dragged on. Each day I sat on the wooden bench, listening to victims speak. A widow who lost her retirement nest egg. A young couple whose baby slept in a car because their home was seized. Their voices cracked, their hands trembled, but together we painted the picture of a company built on lies. On the 7th day, the verdict came. Guilty of fraud. Prison time for the directors. Their assets frozen, liquidated, and earmarked for compensation. Ethan squeezed my shoulder. It won't be full restitution, but you'll recover a substantial sum. Enough to start again. Start again. At 75. The words felt both heavy and liberating. A month later, I moved into a modest 2-story cottage on the edge of town. It wasn't the riverside mansion, but it was mine. Paid for deed in my name keys jingling in my pocket. Gerald came over with a bottle of bourbon, and we christened the porch with a quiet toast. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. But peace didn't last long. One evening, just as the sun dipped and the crickets began their chorus, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Laura standing there, a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes ringed with dark circles. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't move. "How did you find me neighbors from your old place?" "They said you'd moved here." She shifted nervously. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside reluctantly. She walked in, glanced around at the simple furnishings, the clean but modest rooms. Something flickered in her eyes, maybe pity, maybe shame. "Dad, I know you're angry. You have every right. What we did," her voice cracked, It was unforgivable. But we're desperate. Derek's business collapsed. We're living in a cramped apartment. The kids, they're struggling. Mason dropped out. Chloe barely talks to me. We don't know where to turn. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. And so you turned back to me. The man you told you didn't need. Tears welled in her eyes. I was wrong. We were wrong. Please, Dad, even if you can't forgive us, help the kids. They don't deserve this. Her words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. But I remembered Chloe mocking me. Mason calling me useless, Derek smirking as he shoved me out of my own house. Children don't grow that cruel by accident. They learn it. What exactly do you want, Laura? I asked quietly. Money. A little just to get back on our feet. Or maybe... She hesitated. Could we stay here for a while? I shook my head slowly. No, not this time. I won't be your safety net anymore. She flinched as if struck. Dad, please. We're family. Family. My voice hardened. Family doesn't throw you into the street. Family doesn't tell you you're not needed. You killed that word the night you locked me out. For a long moment we just stared at each other, father and daughter bound by blood, but divided by betrayal. Finally, Laura picked up her bag. Her shoulders sagged. So this is it then. You're cutting us off. I opened the door and looked out into the twilight. No, Laura. You cut me off the moment you chose greed over love. I'm only accepting it now. She stepped outside without another word. I closed the door behind her, my chest heavy but firm. For the first time, I realized forgiveness wasn't always the noble choice. Sometimes survival meant closing the door and keeping it closed. After Laura walked away that evening, I sat in silence for a long time. The house creaked in its own rhythm, the crickets outside sang their chorus, and for the first time I felt the weight of finality. Something inside me had snapped shut. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in acceptance. The next morning, I woke up with sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, painting the floorboards gold. I brewed coffee, toasted bread, and sat on my porch with the newspaper. Simple. Ordinary. But after months of chaos, it felt like a luxury. That was the start of my new rhythm. Gerald came by most afternoons. Sometimes we played cards. Sometimes we just sat on the porch in companionable silence. We'd sip bourbon or sweet tea and talk about nothing in particular, the Braves' score, the weather memories of projects we'd worked on decades ago. It amazed me how healing friendship could be. Gerald didn't want my money, didn't resent my presence, didn't measure my worth in deeds or bank accounts. He simply valued me for being Howard. One day, he nudged me with his cane. There's a volunteer program at the Children's Center. They're short on older folks who can read play, chess, tell stories. You'd be perfect. At first, I laughed it off. Me with kids. Gerald, I couldn't even get my own grandkids to look up from their phones. Maybe that's the point, he said quietly. So I went. The Children's Center was painted bright yellow, the walls covered in crayon art and paper cutouts. A dozen kids ran around, voices bouncing off the hallways. At first I felt out of place, an old man shuffling into a world of boundless energy. But then one boy with big brown eyes tugged on my sleeve. Will you play checkers with me? Something in his voice so open and trusting cracked my defenses. Of course, I said. That game turned into many. Soon I was coming twice a week, reading storybooks, teaching checkers and chess, telling them about bridges and concrete and the smell of fresh lumber in the morning air. They listened. They laughed. They called me Grandpa Howard. It didn't matter that we weren't bound by blood. In that laughter, I found the family I thought I had lost forever. Around the same time, Ethan called with good news. The court finalized the asset seizure. You'll be receiving your share within the month. When the funds arrived, I didn't rush to buy something grand. I didn't want mansions or marble floors. I put a chunk into savings, donated some to the Children's Center, and set aside enough for one dream I'd postponed for decades' travel. Margaret had always wanted to see Rome, Venice, Paris. We used to sit at the kitchen table with travel brochures, promising ourselves someday. But someday never came. Cancer stole it from her and from me. Now, with my life pared down to essentials, I realized there was no reason to wait. So I booked a ticket. One suitcase, one passport, one heart, determined to keep beating for itself. When I told Gerald, his eyes lit up. Well, hell, maybe I'll come too. Always wanted to see the Colosseum. Then pack a bag, I grinned. We'll eat gelato until we can't move. We laughed, and for the first time in years, my laughter wasn't tinged with sorrow. It was real. That night, as I sat on the porch with the cicadas singing and the stars beginning to dot the sky, I realized something profound. Life hadn't ended when Laura shut me out. In fact, it had just begun again. Rome smelled of stone and history. I stood before the Colosseum, sunlight streaking across its arches, and thought of Margaret. She had clipped pictures of this place from magazines, telling me one day we'd walk those ancient streets hand in hand. I didn't have her hand now, but I carried her memory in every step. Gerald and I wandered cobbled alleys, ate pasta at street cafes, and laughed like schoolboys when we got lost in Venice's maze of canals. We stood in the Louvre, staring at paintings older than America itself. In Florence, we drank wine on a balcony overlooking red rooftops. Everywhere we went, I felt lighter, like I was shedding years of loneliness, betrayal, and regret. Travel wasn't about checking places off a list. It was about proving to myself that life didn't end at 75, or with a slammed door from your own daughter. After a month, I returned to Savannah with a suitcase full of postcards, photos, and a heart that beat steadier than before. My little cottage waiting for me felt more like home than any mansion ever had. The Children's Center became my second home. I read stories about knights and explorers. I taught kids how to measure a line straight with chalk, how to stack blocks so they wouldn't topple. They called me Grandpa Howard with a kind of affection my blood grandchildren had never offered. One afternoon, a girl with curly hair tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Howard, are you really all alone?" I smiled softly. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Not anymore." Because I wasn't. My family was here in Gerald's laughter and Ethan's determination, in the kids' trust in the neighbors who waved when I sat on my porch. Blood had betrayed me, but love had found me elsewhere. And most importantly, I had found myself again. Sometimes, walking through town, I'd catch a glimpse of Laura from a distance. Once outside a grocery store, once across the street near the courthouse. We never spoke. Our eyes met once, briefly. She nodded. I nodded back. That was all. No anger, no pleading. Just silence and unspoken agreement that our paths had split. I thought I'd feel regret, but I didn't. I felt free, because family isn't just the people who share your name. It's the people who share your respect, your trust, your love. And if those aren't there, then all you share is blood, and that isn't enough. Now I sit on my porch most evenings, the roses blooming in the garden Margaret would have loved. I sip coffee or sometimes bourbon listening to jazz on the radio. I watch the sky turn pink over Savannah and think, this is my life now. Quiet, honest, dignified. And it's mine. Not bought with money. Not stolen by greed. Mine. I am 75 years old. I lost a daughter, but I found myself. I lost illusions, but I gained peace. And maybe that's what life is about, not holding on to what betrays you, but embracing what sets you free. Thank you for listening to my story. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Share your city, your state, or even your country down in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe to Brian's Story. We've got so many more journeys, lessons, and voices waiting for you.